Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World, the Practical Voice Podcast. This episode of VUX World is brought to you by BotMock, the best way to design your voice experiences. If you're still using, post-it notes or, Sketch, or you're using other prototyping manual effort sort of like tools, if you're doing that, then you should really check out BotMock. It is a fantastic design tool where you can design things like Alexa skills and Google Actions. You can collaborate with your team within the platform. You can go all the way through to developer handover. There's templates in there. You can preview and test it. It's an absolutely fantastic tool. You can try it out for free if you go to botmock.com/VUXworld. That is BotMock, BOTMOCK.com/VUXworld. Check it out. Thank you, BotMock. This week, we're speaking to Heidi Culbertson. She is the co-founder and CEO of Ask Marvi, and what they do, essentially, they design voice experiences for the older generation. The stats that Heidi has on the aging population in America is unreal. 10,000 people turn 65 every day in the US, and those people over 65 have 70% of the country's discretionary income. The opportunities in designing and providing voice experiences for the elderly are absolutely vast, but there's all kinds of things in here that will apply to you, even if you're not designing for the elderly. So we speak to Heidi today all around Ask Marvi, all around what it is and what the mission is and what it's up to and what Heidi's been up to. We get really into detail in all of the testing and all of the training that Heidi's been doing with the older generation, and people think of the older generation as being this huge group of people, but as you'll find out, it's actually as diverse as the rest of the population. Lots of different generations within there, lots of different personality types and interests and attitudes, and some of the insights that Heidi has from the testing and from the user research that she's been doing is absolutely fascinating. It's full of tips and tricks in terms of designing for the elderly. It's full of tips and tricks in terms of design practices you can use for yourself, and there's a lot of talk in there around just quite how big the opportunity is with the elderly in the voice space. This is a fantastic one. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm obviously joined by Dustin Coates as ever on this one, and this is Heidi Culbertson of Ask Marvi on VUX World. So thank you for joining us, Heidi. Appreciate you spending the time to speak to us. I think what you're up to with Marvi sounds incredibly interesting. Some people who were at the Voice Summit may well have come across it and may well have heard you speak. People that are involved quite closely in the voice industry, I'm sure, will be certainly familiar with you and the work that you've been doing. But for those that aren't, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing with Marvi?
Sure, happy to. I'm obviously Heidi Culbertson. I'm a 25 plus year veteran in technology. Was fortunate to ride the early wireless, early mobile adoption curve, having worked for a wireless carrier and then a whole bunch of startups in the mobile app business. But due to having an elder parent, was exposed to the original Amazon Echo back in 2014. And so Ask Marvi is a voice design company that specializes in designing voice experiences for older adults and families and anyone who's involved in their aging journey. So we're a design shop. We're very focused on a mission to just make life better by voice enabling life for older adults.
So tell us a little bit about Ask Marvi then. Tell us a little bit what it does and the kind of premise, and then I know that you've got quite an interesting kind of founding story that surrounds it all. So first of all, tell us a little bit about what Ask Marvi does.
So Ask Marvi is a platform of different skills and actions that we've built for engagement. Social isolation is probably the largest health risk in the world, but especially in the U.S., where over 30% of those who 30% of the older population identify as having less than 2 people to rely on. So Ask Marvy is set up to provide different features, notifications, social engagement, kind of utility features, and then social engagement from games to what's for lunch, what's for dinner. So we're building both a platform of features for the consumer side, and we're also building a B2B kind of closed network for senior living communities where they can add their residents and distribute information and content to kind of that closed community. So we've got kind of 2 revenue streams driving and 2 audiences to meet.
That's interesting. Sorry, go on, Dustin.
And I was just going to ask a little bit more about how that B2B side works. So that sounds really interesting. Is it quite different than what you're doing on the B2C side, or what does that look like exactly?
Great question. It is different. There's a lot of overlap. So some of the things, because we've developed quite a few private kind of skills individually. We do a lot of consulting. And the B2B side is, if you think about whether it's an actual senior living community, or it could be a home health company that serves clients that are aging in their own home. How that works is we invite, it's a licensed platform. The community adds their residents to their closed community, and then they can assign those residents to things like what's for lunch, what's the activity of the day. The activity is XYZ. Do you need help getting there? Yes. Okay, we'll schedule Mike. To games, where a lot of communities have different activities, and there might be a choir. They might be playing. I don't know, Monopoly, or name an I Love Lucy episode. And we're voice enabling those type of games for them to also include the Echo Dots because it helps with mobility and speed and things like that. So we're doing a lot of B2B kind of community type design that will help with engagement, memory, those type of things.
So those games, is that a game that people will play kind of together in a room with the same device, or is that something that they'll play individually in their separate rooms but all through that device?
Good question, and it's funny because games, we hear a lot about kids' games being developed, but games have been very popular amongst older adults. We are designing in a couple different ways. We've designed some that they can use in their own kind of residential unit, whether that's at home or within their senior living community. And then we have some that are designed to be played in the common area with a group. We are not, on the B2B side, we're not playing with others. We're not playing with a fake opponent, and we're not playing with others globally. We're really trying to use voice to drive older adults to be engaged with the community that surrounds them. And that's whether it's a game, whether it's an activity, whether it's just a notification set up. We started Marvy because I had an elder parent who was really active, played tennis till she was 87, was legally blind by age 90 due to macular degeneration, and her entire world changed. We gave her the Echo the first week it came out, opened up her world again, and we started building, and this was in 2016, we started building Alexa features and Alexa skills for a very specific purpose. We were very early, so we ended up deciding to spend time with users. And we spent all of 2017 and half of 2018 with older adults. And we've trained, it's probably close to 15,000 now, older adults, just how to use Alexa. because we wanted to understand the age group. Because the over 65 population is not one big monolithic group. In the U.S., and we've talked about this, in the U.S., 10,000 people turn 65 every single day, and aging, and that will be the case for the next 19 years. So it's a need, but it's also a business opportunity. So in spending all that time with users and listening to them speak to Alexa, speak to Google Home, listening to the side conversations they have was very enlightening, because there's 3 generations over the age of 65 and they all interact with Alexa a little differently. So that affects design.
In what way do they interact differently?
So the oldest old, which is really kind of age 90 and up, which is the World War II generation. They are much more polite than we are today, number one. So they say please and thank you in almost everything they say to Alexa. It's really interesting. And the follow-on mode that Alexa put out 6 months ago, where they leave the session open, was a huge hit amongst older adults, because now when they say thank you, Alexa would say you're welcome. And they used to get mad that it didn't before. But that's the oldest old is the generation that listened to the radio growing up. There was no TV until later. So if you're doing an Alexa skill or a Google action, that's a story. That's more interactive stories, a longer narrative. They actually prefer to listen to a male voice because it reminds them of listening to the radio way back when. If it's a caregiving action, whether it's a notification to family or possibly to a care team, they prefer a female voice. All of the voice assistants speak too quickly. So from a design perspective, it's critical to understand if your audience has a slice of older adult, to slow it down, that you've got to use, SSML and other tools to slow down the rate of speech. As people age, people start to lose a little bit of their hearing. So you have to make sure there's enough time. Now, that's the oldest generation. Then there's this block that's, kind of 70 to 90, and you'll have a mix. They have an interest in travel. Active seniors have an interest in travel and exploring and learning new things. If there's a little bit of care involved and there's a remote family member, designing how you design involves not just the interaction between the voice assistant and the older adult, but you have to design in the family member. So it's not just a 2-way interaction. It's actually could be a 3 or 4 or 5 or 6-way interaction as far as your design flow goes.
Yeah. And what about the group underneath that then? You mentioned the 90 plus, the 70 to 90. What's different about the ones kind of underneath that, sort of 70 and below?
What's different about that is there's a role reversal. So they're like, you're going to design, and I'm in that group. Well, I'm not quite in that group, actually. What am I saying? My older siblings are all in that group. They're kind of in the design for all. You want a multimodal experience, but flip the 100-year-old to the 60-year-old, 65-year-old. Normally, they're going to interact like everyone else does, but they want to be on the receiving end because a lot of them have elder parents who are 80 and 90. So it's almost and then there's a little bit, the young side of that is really kind of keeping an eye on 2 families. They're raising their own. They still have kids, and they might probably adult kids, but now they have elder parents. So it's kind of the sandwich caregiving situation. So it's really just being aware of what surrounds the individual using the voice devices.
you were mentioning earlier on around 10,000 people turn 65 every day, and you've also got it's mad that in it, but you've also got another thing around the amount of discretionary income that group of people control as well.
Yeah, so when you look at the over 65 population, you really have to look at, you can't look at it as this big block of users. But because this is a generation that's, at the tail end of working, the over 65 population controls 70% of the discretionary money as they enter retirement. So it's a huge opportunity. And again, we're still early in voice experience and voice design and just using voice as it evolves. But it's a huge opportunity for voice comp. And the older adult adoption of smart devices is very high growth, because it's the first interface that is easy to use for everybody, but especially for older adults.
Yeah. You mentioned you've done a lot of training, and presumably you've done quite a lot of sort of testing. We'll probably get into the testing in a little while. But in terms of the training, I mean, my nana was around, she's 81, I think, 82 maybe. And all it took was for her to see me use it once and tell her that you just say Alexa first and then say anything else after it. And, for someone who is completely opposed to technology, and pretty vocal about that, she doesn't want the internet, DVD players, even though that no one has a DVD player hardly these days, DVD players are just completely not wanted. But within half an hour, not even half an hour, it was like moments later, I was in the next room and she's asking Alexa to play some Gordon Lightfoot. So it's like the barrier, I suppose, or the kind of onboarding process is fairly simple. You mentioned that you don't, anyone can sort of use it if they can speak, kind of thing. So what is involved in training older people to use these devices from what you've been working on over the last year or so?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's very different today in comparison to what it was like a year and a half ago. But most of the training, and it depends on the age group, most of the training, the difficulty is, number one, is just plain in the setup. As easy as it is to set up the devices, and, usually someone is setting it up for the older adult. Less than 50% of older adults, less than 50% of those over 65 have smartphones. So a year ago, it's like, okay, how do I access the Alexa app if I don't have a smartphone? Of course, you can go to alexa.amazon.com. That's not something everyone knows. So the key to training older adults has always been to find, what do they do every day? Because you and I have been using voice, the three of us have been using voice for quite some time. But older adults, as much as they know what to speak, they don't know how to ask. So the first thing you do with an older adult is set up a light, turn on the light, is find something they're going to do every day. Because fall prevention is such a big issue as you age, connecting a light is important. You can talk about... in training, you can ask for a song. Well, if they don't listen to music normally, they're not going to start. So it's really finding, what are they interested in? Is there a podcast? Is there a radio station? A lot of them listen to radio. And then it's really just giving them the correct phrases. A year ago, you had to say the phrase exactly the way, it was needed. There's a little bit more flexibility now as skill developers and designers, as we've learned how to add alternatives phrasing to our skills. But it's really about finding that one routine that's going to happen every day, and then they start using it. Because in the beginning, I used to get a lot of calls about how to train, because their pilot groups were not adopting, and after they learned it the first day they weren't using it. And you want them to use it for more than just music. How do you pull your Kindle book? How do you buy a new Kindle book when you don't really know how to, your kids do it for you? So it's really just learning the phrasing.
And what implications would you say that this has for individual skill developers, people who aren't necessarily creating the entire experience for these groups, but are building just one small part that they really want to be inclusive to them as well?
I think it's a huge opportunity. I think it's an opportunity for, it's rare we have the opportunity to do good and build a business or make money at the same time. And as monetization changes for skill developers, I think it's very difficult to build skills for the entire over 65 population. So, for example, we don't do healthcare. We do well-being. Our mission is normally when someone's aging, they might be active and then something happens. They have a knee replacement, they get sick, whatever it is, and their life changes. And then there's this, 1 year, 10 year, 20 year period where their social circles change. That's where we're targeting. There are other skill developers who are targeting healthcare, and they're waiting for the clouds to become HIPAA compliant. For skill developers, granted, I'm 60 years old, and I'm the youngest of a large family, and thus I had an older parent. And I've been in technology for a long time. This audience is a huge opportunity for business. So skill developers should define where in the opportunity, where does it interest them? Whether it's just sending simple notifications so someone can send an I'm okay message, whether it's developing a cool game for an older adult, whether, it's the first step is always, what utility can I build? And then it's about how do you turn utility into adoption? And then how do you turn adoption into engagement? And for older adults, how do you let them engage with the community that surrounds them locally? And then the next step is always how do you bring the community towards them so they stay engaged in this life? So for skill developers, there's a ton of opportunity in the B2C kind of aging in place, what's called aging in place world. There is a lot of opportunity in building custom skills, which we do a lot of private skills for different senior living communities, whether that's in the U.S. or around the world, because aging's the entire world's population is aging. But there's a different. You have to spend time with the audience because you have to understand where they get tripped up when they're speaking to a voice assistant. Makes a world of difference.
And where do they typically get tripped up when they're talking to a voice assistant?
Normally it's the assistant speaking too quickly, and they don't hear it. So understand that they're going to say repeat more often until Hondify has a setting in their app that you can change the rate of speech. We have to do that as designers if we design for Actions or Alexa or the others. Very clear instructions up front are important, and it helps to put a sound around when you're going to ask a question, because that kind of re-alerts them to listen a little harder or better. So there's little nuances. We have a group of 70-year-olds that actually help us write our conversations.
That is such a good idea.
Because this is the generation that, we have some of this is kind of our secrets, part of our secret sauce, but we're serving a generation that grew up without technology. They're not afraid of it. That's a myth. This is the generations that invented, the television and went to space, you know. But they grew up writing letters. So complex conversation is second nature to them. So, but they have a different slang vocabulary. They laugh at different things. It's not, I don't want to identify them as different, but from a designing perspective to drive engagement as a skill developer, you have to understand what will make them say, next, or come back, or keep the session going. And the best way to do that with any audience, whether it's older or not, is to spend time with users.
If you're still writing code to design and test your chatbot's conversational experience, then you should check out BotMock. It's the smartest way to design and prototype conversational apps. So if you're using things like mind maps and process maps and whiteboards, or if you're getting straight into the code to try and build some stuff, or if you're using things like Sketch to try and build sort of prototypes in, then 100% check out BotMock. It's companies of all sizes using it, small companies, large companies. You can build Alexa skills in there, and it'll save you hours because you can actually collaborate with your whole team while you're designing your thing. It's even down to handing it over to developers. The whole thing is a huge collaboration tool. It's absolutely fantastic. Do check it out. You can try BotMock for free at botmock.com/VUXWorld. That's botmock.com/VUXWorld.
How important is it not just to spend the time with the users, but you mentioned also bringing some of the target age audience in to write some of the scripts, write some of the responses? How important is it to bring them in on that side as well?
I think it's very important. We realized that very quickly, and that's why we're going through from a business perspective. We started off, we're going to build this platform of different features to serve this. As time has evolved, as some of the calls and consulting advisory work that we do, we really have to define ourselves more as a design shop that's doing X, that's doing voice experiences. When you're around the users and they're interacting with the Echo device and you've got a group, it's very interesting if you will listen to the side conversations of the group rather than the person just talking to the Echo, because out of those side conversations come all these ideas and different tangents where the voice conversation might go, which is fascinating. And bringing those people in to help you craft the conversations makes a world of difference. I can't tell you how many times we've had some of our secret sauce group, test the script and say, wait a minute, I know you put a pause there, or I know you put a lengthy break, but you need another one here. It's too fast. Or, boy, it'd be nice if you could use a different voice there. So it's within any user group. Input along the entire path is helpful. Not just from we built this, let's have them beta test it. Have them involved in the creative process.
It sounds as though you're kind of getting in. I mean, this is a whole sort of new area of user research that, from what I can see, hasn't really been kind of explored. The stuff that you're saying there around getting people involved in the creation process, and they can then pick out, whether the pauses are timed correctly and whether the cadence is kind of right and stuff like that. Is there anything different that you would do when you're approaching a user research study, or maybe it's a design workshop, or some kind of like beta testing, or all of that outreach that you're doing and the user research that you're doing? Is there anything in particular that you do differently when you're doing it with an older audience to get these kind of insights, or do you treat it like any other research project?
My background isn't doing research projects. So although I've been doing UX on the mobile side forever, it's a little different because there's less of an inherent understanding of how workflows happen. So if I'm working with a younger audience on a workshop, on a kind of user research on a mobile app, I already know that they know how to swipe and they know how to, pinch, and they know how to, upload or download an app and do updates and all of that. With an older generation, some of them know it, but it's not inherently logical to them that they need to open a skill and then they need to ask, say, stop or help, or it's just, there's a little bit of training there just on real basic things. And then once they have an understanding of that and you explain, okay, this is what we're trying to do. You're all, creative. You've all been kind of living a handwritten world in your early days. So you're experts for us. Once they understand that they're the experts for us, you run it like any other user experience project.
How much of what you find when you're doing this training and this research, it sounds as though you get a lot of feedback from the design side. So we mentioned about putting pauses in different places and slowing down the voice and that. How much of the feedback do you find is feedback that you can actually implement in terms of the design versus how much actually might be feedback on the actual system itself? How much is feedback on the Alexa platform itself, and how much can you actually do something about? Is there a mix, or is it largely all around the design?
It's largely around the design, and that's by intention. We have some users. We started our training program because the faster folks learned how to use Alexa, the faster the adoption of Marvi would happen. Number one. Number two was the user. We wanted user experience data. Now today we have several people in our group who are building their own skills on Storyline and some of the other kind of no coding platforms. They're starting to ask a few different questions, but for the most part, it's really, our focus has always been to work from the user experience backwards. I mean, that's been my philosophy, is you meet customers where they are and help them get where they think they want to go. So our company is 100% about, okay, this is the user experience. Now, how does this experience need to touch our back end system from a system perspective? How does it need to touch family members, which affects the back end system? So it's primarily about design, but it does affect how you architect your systems. Because even the simplest thing, which we put out, we're about to take down the original Marvi skill because we've rebuilt it. But even back in early 2016, we had a couple just simple notifications. The older adult would say, ask Marvi to send I'm okay. And a text message or email would go to the contacts that they had loaded into our customer portal. And they could, configure it. This one gets text, this one gets email. Well, part of that training of even setting that up was, okay, we need to have the family member know that they have to opt in to receive that text message. How does that affect our system? And how does that slow down the older adult? So even though we're talking about design flow always feeds back to how the systems work together. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, because we're not a training company, we do a lot of training. But most of our training was in the early days. And we still do workshops on just training how to use the device. We do workshops and ask older adults to come in. And then we're very, adamant. We're building skills. We have a lot out there. We're about to launch several kind of exercise skills for seniors. Because it's all about keeping them active and happy.
And so you mentioned Alexa a few times now. Which platforms are you working on? Is it just Alexa, or are you working on other platforms as well?
So right now we're only working on Alexa. Originally we started there because it was the only one out there. We wanted to watch. We have a couple Google Actions out there. We wanted to watch where the adoption happened. Not so much the capability of the platform, but where is the adoption happening in the older adult population of what are they buying? So our plan is to always be kind of platform agnostic, voice service agnostic. We will kind of translate everything into Google Actions and on the other platforms. A lot of the studies come out about how many devices have been sold, what's the growth rate of different demographics, both from a geography perspective and an age population. And I made a comment. I said, there's high growth in the over 65 of these devices. I said, but what we're not capturing is a lot of the devices that older adults have were given to them by one of their kids. So you can't really track who's purchasing. We need to track who's actually using. And because for this generation, that's different. Because a lot of them are gifted. My kids gave me an Echo for Christmas. I got a Google. I have all of them all over the house. And we're testing a lot of things on the action side, and I actually do a lot of design and dialogue flow. It's just our audience is still heavily on the Alexa side. So, and we do fun skills for just general populations too. It's just, it matters that we enable voice for our older loved ones. Cause this is not designing just for older adults. This is designing for mom and dad and grandma and grandpa. We want to keep their life special, and voice just makes it easier. I mean, things become more difficult with age. And we're all living longer. We're not, older adults are not this, invalid group of people. But interaction, we know it ourselves, interaction via voice is just easier. So if we can bring back simple and easy, and kind of combat the engage with your world, it's all a good thing. And it's a huge business opportunity, because as much as I'm doing social good, I'm building a company.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned around obviously you've done a lot of work with older people, and you've done a lot of training, a lot of research, a lot of sort of different kind of design things that you've learned and stuff. But then also a part of the platform is the other person on the kind of the receiving end of it. So the family member, for example, or the person who has either gifted them the device or who is kind of part of that network. And you mentioned that, within the platform, you can do things like send a text message to tell somebody that you're okay. And I think you mentioned before last time we spoke that you can actually ask Alexa to tell your daughter or whatever that you'd like her to come and visit or something along those lines. So, and I think at the beginning you mentioned that you needed to do some sort of work with those people, either the relations or the friends of the older person. What role did they play throughout the creation, and what role did they play in actually using or contributing to the system, and how did you approach involving them when it came to the design?
Yeah, that's a great question. It takes me back to my roots, because we do a lot of design work, we do a lot of user experience work, but the bottom line is we're developing voice skills for older adults, families, and anyone who surrounds them as they assist them. So in the beginning, when we first launched, my mother used to send an email that just said, "I'm okay," in the subject header, even when she was playing tennis down in Florida. Just, because she had 6 kids that were like, "Is mom okay?" She's 85 and still playing tennis. When she lost her eyesight, we added dragon dictation to her computer. So she would just do it, she would just speak it. Well, then she lost her eyesight completely and she couldn't find the app to open it. So we put it up in the corner of her iPad, and then she would feel for it. And then she couldn't anymore. So we had this gap. And then when the echo came out, it was like, oh, okay, the very first thing we're going to do is send an I'm okay message. And then when talking to my family and kind of the neighbors, actually, who also had elder parents, they were part of, okay, how about if we just send it via text message? And then one of them said, no, I don't really like the text. I prefer getting it as an email. And they were like, okay, so now we have this portal. You go in and you add the contact. We had 4 features, 4 different notifications. I'm okay, sending an I'm okay, sending a check on me, sending visit me, sending I want you to call me, because this is in the early days, 2016, before calling and messaging. And, back when you asked Alexa what time it was and she would say 12:40 and she didn't say AM or PM, which is crazy. And then family news. So we asked them how should we configure, what do we need to include, in the configuration? Because we legally have to verify mobile and email. But do we want to give them a choice of one or the other or both? So family members that gave us that input. Several of our initial, because once my mom started using it, a couple of her neighbors wanted it, and we were secretly locked. We had hacked into the device before development even opened. Some of the neighbors wanted it. So we actually, family news came about because some of the older adults had really large families and they were having difficulty dialing the phone anymore because they couldn't really see the buttons. So we developed a mobile app for the family members so that they could send messages back to Marvy, and then Marvy would distribute the message when the older adults had asked Marvy for family news. So that's a long answer to a question that, yes, every step of the way we looked at who else might be involved, and then we need to talk to them so we understand what's easiest for them because they come from a different technology kind of baseline. It's been fascinating. And we get asked a lot, will you do medicine management? And I said, first of all, the clouds are not HIPAA compliant right now. My goal is not to design hospital and inpatient and healthcare applications. I'm going to leave that to kind of the real healthcare organizations, although we've consulted a lot on user design. Ours is really about how do we keep these people socially engaged and how do we make it easier for the families. That I'm okay message, as simple as it is to do, has a huge impact because it meant we moved my mother from, as an example, I always use my mom as an example, from Florida to Boston when she completely went blind at 90, because most of my family's in Boston. And my sister used to stop in every morning. Well, once she could send the I'm okay message, my sister would just keep going to work and check on her later, which helped her from a work perspective. So it's really understanding kind of I hate to call it a workflow, the family flow, and then how can you insert voice to make that just easier for everybody.
What challenges are you facing now then? So you mentioned you're redesigning the platform. Well, in fact, let's do the challenges after this. Let's first of all tell us a little bit about, you said you were going to update the platform and you're doing a big rebuild the first time you've done it since you first built the initial one. Why are you doing it and what's changing?
Yeah, so we launched the original Marvy consumer skill in 2016 with those simple 4 features. And back then, you were limited in the number of characters to 500. You could only have 2 slots. There's just a lot, there's a lot of design and development tools that have come about since then. So, and they were very simple. They were send an I'm okay message. The recipient received a email or text message. And we always wanted to be able to have that family member respond back to the echo via the same pathway. So if they received a text, can they text back? So there's a lot of things that we couldn't do just because it wasn't possible from a technical perspective that we want to add enhancements to. We also we'll sunset a couple of the features because calling and messaging has come out. The call me feature is not used as often. The I'm okay without a doubt is the biggest hit, even though it's very simple. So we thought about, let's just enhance the existing. But since we built it so long ago and so many things have changed, and there's just the back end, there's just more capability. We're gonna literally sunset it, tear it down, and we've been rebuilding it. Now on the B2B side, we're in stealth mode. So other than some beta testing and doing a lot of private skills that are published privately, when we architected in 2016, who knew? Who knew? I remember we wrote, because I've got a background in IoT also, we wrote a lot of them so that we could, we had an Echo device talking to another Echo device across the country in 2000. So we knew there were a lot of capabilities we wanted to eventually get certified. So, and it's time. The adoption happened. We were so early that I felt there was such a huge and immediate impact, as you talked about, even with your mom or your grandmother. I can't remember. It was so immediate, and it really was so helpful and opened up their world that from a adoption standpoint, that's when we started to train. It was a revenue stream also. When you look at emerging technology, there's different phases where you can capture revenue, and training was one of them at that time. So beyond user experience. And a lot of the training and the user are conversation designers is what they call themselves, or they call themselves actually talk designers. A lot of the nuances will add to future capabilities, whether it's in the Marvy skill, which Marvy will always be made up of several different features. Then we'll have different skills that can be enabled both on the B2B side and the consumer side. We're coming out, it's in certification right now, but we've got one that's chair exercise, kind of the sit and be fit to keep them active, so they can just do chair exercises at home. That will be available to anyone, but it could also be done within a senior living or senior center group. So it's a lot of opportunity, but we're very focused on just keeping people moving, keeping them engaged, and keeping older adults remaining with a feeling of independence and control, family members having peace of mind and preemptive awareness, bringing the community towards all of them. Voice literally is going to revolutionize aging.
Well, it has a lot of potential, doesn't it?
And I know we've kind of gone all over the place. Just, I know more about aging than I ever wanted to know. I'm very different from mobile. User experience and design has always been important. But with voice and older adults and family members and designing the workflow, how they all kind of interact with each other, and do we need to send a notification here, even though they're just playing a game, it's very different from designing for mobile. It's very different from development for mobile. You even look at the technical stack a little differently. Because you have more, where you might build a stack that, you're obviously using third-party systems and tools and interfaces. It's a different tool set when you have to build interfaces that start with voice, but have to distribute in a method and a path that makes sense to the extended family, and can return data back to the user. It's very interesting. But the biggest thing, no matter who you're developing or designing for in voice, whether it's kids, whether it's, keep it simple. People used to poo-paw, you're just sending an I'm okay message. They said, you have no idea how many adult children want an I'm okay message from their older parent, and how many older parents want to send an I'm okay message so their kids will stop bothering them. So, and that's where it's understanding the user and the use case, and then building both from a design and development perspective in parallel.
It's interesting that it's probably an example of where doing that research initially ends up giving you an idea or a use case that you would never have even imagined in the first place.
Yeah, and if I didn't have an older parent at the time, then, and I have a lot of older siblings. So, the 4 original features all were actually my mother's idea. When she got the Echo, we started teaching her how to use it. And, she couldn't see the light on top because she was blind. And this is, November, December 2014. And she would, we taught her how to ask for music. She loved to read, loved to sing. And, actually wore her glasses till the day she died because she refused to believe she couldn't see anymore. But she used to go, can I do this? Can I do this? Or how about if I send you the I'm okay message through this? Then you guys can stop bugging me every morning. That's where that came from.
Wow, that's weird.
So
what would you like to see, from either the Alexa platform? Is there any challenges that you're facing at the moment, or is there anything that you would like to see in terms of either feature releases or enhancements that would enable you to either implement a particular use case that you have ideas on, or what do you think would make it easier from an adoption perspective, or what would you like to see kind of either changed or enhanced in the kind of voice world?
I think we'll see. Beyond seeing, just the improvement and just the natural language processing, all of that. But from a skill development perspective and a skill design perspective, we spend an awful lot of time, I'd say most of our time, is spent on really defining the cadence of the speech, SSML, manipulations, sound all of that type. It would be much easier if I could globally say for this skill, I want to change the rate, this percentage for the entire skill, and then I'll just add emphasis. So I'd like to see some better designer manipulation, but I'd also like to see from the ability for all of the platforms to allow user controls. So if I'm 10 years old and I have a stutter, I wish I could adjust the way Alexa speaks to me. If I'm 90 years old and I'm blind and I'm deaf in one ear, I have hearing aids, I wish I could say, Alexa, change speech rate to 6, just like we change volume. So I'd love to see the platforms evolve to have some user controls, because it's, I think there are skills out there that are not used besides the whole voice search issue, which I think is going to be innovated. I don't think we can do search the way we do it on web or mobile. But that's another conversation. I believe that there needs to be, it's time. I think they all know it's been needed, but it's time. The adoption is happening. It's time to give users a little bit more control, and it's time to give designers a little bit control, which will make developers happier.
Yeah. Wicked. Dustin, any final thoughts or any final questions?
No, I think we've covered a lot today. I think we've gone over a lot of different subjects throughout our conversation.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. That I think it's an area that, you know, the aging population is not just in America. The UK is exactly the same. The population is an aging population.
Oh, it's a global thing.
100%, and I think that I've never come across a company who's quite breaking quite as much ground, or a person who's quite breaking quite as much ground in terms of trying to figure out exactly what these people need, and you know, it's so interesting, some of the things that you've learned and some of the kind of enhancements that you've been able to make, and the value that you're providing people is absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much for joining us. Where can people, I know you mentioned that the B2B side of things is in a bit of a stealth mode now, but where can people either, you know, keep track of the development on that and keep track of, or figure out what you're up to, and get involved, or maybe even try out Ask Marvi?
Sure. The website is askmarvi.com. I can be found on Twitter at H Culbertson is my personal Twitter, which is really all about voice. Ask Marvi, the company, is at Ask Marvi is the Twitter handle. I can be reached via email at Heidi, Heidi, at askmarvi.com, and that's ASKMARVEE.com. So I hope this was helpful. I know we went all over the place. Huge opportunity. I hope this inspires others to help get involved in designing and developing and really blowing out monetization also for older adults.
Fantastic. Heidi, that was inspirational. Thank you so much for joining us. That's been absolutely unbelievable.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
That was Heidi Culbertson. Thank you so much, Heidi, for joining us. That was a really interesting episode, that. I think that kids' skills and kids' kind of interactions with Alexa and Amazon promoting it, and everybody kind of hopping on the kind of kids' skills bandwagon, it's really well documented, and it seems to be that, you know, that is one of the real primary use cases. I feel as though maybe the older generation is probably being a little bit overlooked here, and Heidi is one of the few organisations. I know Vinnie Loki are doing some work in this space, but Heidi seemingly, I mean, she's done a hell of a lot of research, hell of a lot of testing, got incredible insights, so there's a load of tips in there for people who are wanting to design for the older generation. And as Heidi said, there's a huge opportunity there, because, you know, the population is an aging population. You know, the UK, I don't know what the stats are from the UK's perspective, but in the US, Heidi was saying that 10,000 people turn 65 every day, which seems absolutely mental. And if they're controlling or have a large part of the discretionary income, then, you know, the opportunities to come could be quite significant. So do have a think about that. I hope, you know, take some time to digest that. I certainly will. I think that it's an interesting area, full of opportunity, and we'll see. I wish Ask Marvi all the best. Wish Heidi all the best. And yeah, that was an interesting one. Thank you, Heidi, for joining us. Thank you, Dustin, for co-hosting. And as always, boys and girls, thank you all for listening. Until next time, see you later.